It sounds like a nightmare.
It does.
Yu-Gi-Oh! The Waking Nightmare.
Sounds like something I've never heard of for a reason.
Tonight at Smetrat Games, we'll be finishing up Season 9 of our House Commander League. Our league has a few extra rules to balance the power level of our in-house meta, notably no infinite combos and no mass land destruction. This is the final game of an 8-week event, and the winner will take the Championship Cup. Tonight's finalists are Aron, Trevor, Matthew, and Braden. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy. Aron will be playing Garth One Eye. He hopes to outvalue his opponents using his incredibly versatile commander to draw cards and manage threats until he can cast a massive finisher for the win. He keeps a hand with Iditha Triumph, Search for Tomorrow, Stomping Ground, Swamp, Snow-Covered Plains, Cyclonic Rift, and Temur Ascendancy. Trevor will be playing Galazeth Prismari. He hopes to win by generating large amounts of mana and using instants and sorceries to finish off his opponents. He keeps a hand with Aspire Bluff Canal, Arch of Orazca, Increasing Vengeance, Arcane Signet, Academy Manufactor, and Wandering Archaic. Braden will be playing Winota, Joiner of Forces. He hopes to win through explosive combat steps, utilizing his commander as a card access value engine. He keeps a hand with Battlefield Forge, Rugged Prairie, Path to Exile, Legion Loyalist, Gold Knight Commander, Fireflux Squad, and Cliffside Rescuer. Matthew will be playing Klauth Unrivaled Ancient, which is a Gruul Dragons deck. His win con is about as self-explanatory as that previous statement, and he keeps a hand with Boseiju Who Shelters All, Temple of the False God, Spire Garden, Soul's Majesty, Seething Song, Decimate, and Skyshroud Claim. Aron goes first, and plays a Stomping Grounds, paying the 2 life to have it enter untapped, following it up by suspending a Search for Tomorrow. On Trevor's turn, he plays a Spire Bluff Canal, which enters the battlefield untapped, and passes to Braden. Braden draws for turn, and plays a Battlefield Forge. He then taps it for a red mana, taking 1 damage, and casts a Legion Loyalist. He then moves to combat, and swings the Loyalist at Aron. Aron takes the 1, and Braden passes turn. Matthew draws for turn, and plays a Boseiju Who Shelters All, and passes to Aron. At the beginning of his upkeep, Aron removes a counter from the Search for Tomorrow trigger, and plays an Iditha Triumph before passing to Trevor. Trevor draws for turn, and plays an Island. He then pays 2 to cast an Arcane Signet, and passes to Braden. Braden untaps, and draws, and plays a Rugged Prairie as his land for turn. He then taps his Battlefield Forge, taking 1 damage, filtering the mana through the Rugged Prairie to add 2 white, and casts an Aethersworn Canonist. He then moves to combat, and swings the Legion Loyalist at Trevor. Trevor takes the 1, going to 39, and Braden passes the turn to Matthew. Matthew draws, and plays a Spire Garden, which enters the battlefield untapped because he has 2 or more opponents, and passes the turn to Aron. At the beginning of Aron's upkeep, the final counter is removed from the suspended Search for Tomorrow, and he searches his library for a land. He puts an island onto the battlefield, and draws for turn. He plays an Undergrowth Stadium, and passes turn. Trevor untaps, and draws for turn, playing an Arch of Orazca, and God Eternal Kefnet. Braden untaps, and draws for turn. He misses his land drop, and moves straight to combat, sending the Legion Loyalist and the Aethersworn Canonist at Matt. Matt takes 3, and Braden passes turn. Matt draws, and plays a mountain, tapping 2, and casting a Zerta Druid, Bane of Editors. On Matt's end step, Aron holds priority, and strongly considers doing something about the Kefnet, or at least broadcasting that he would, and then we move to his turn. Aron draws, and plays a Snow-Covered Plains as his land for turn. He then plays a Temur Ascendancy, and passes to Trevor. On Trevor's turn, he plays an Academy Manufactor, drawing out some concerned excitement from the table, and passing to Braden. Braden untaps, and draws for turn. missing another land drop, and taps for 2, taking 1 damage from the battlefield Forge, and casting a Cliffside Rescuer before passing to Matthew. On Matt's turn, he plays a Temple of the False God as his land, and proceeds to play Gruul against my editing skills, tapping his Boseiju and losing 2 life, tapping the Zerta Druid, causing each of his opponents to lose 1, and casts a Druid of Purification. He targets the Temur Ascendancy with the Druid trigger. Aron targets Trevor's Academy Manufactor. Trevor targets Braden's Aethersworn Canonist, and Braden targets Trevor's Arcane Signet. Each of those permanents are destroyed, and Matthew passes turn to Aron. Aron plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and pays 5 to cast a Seedborn Muse. His opponents respond with Concern,
I want it noted that there was significant eye rolling when that hit the table.
and he passes turn to Trevor. Trevor untaps and draws. He then plays a Scalding Tarn, which he immediately cracks for a mountain, before paying 4, and casting Galazeth Prismari from the command zone. Galazeth's Enter the Battlefield trigger causes Trevor to create a treasure. Say that 5 times fast. He laments the loss of his Arcane Signet, and Aron responds that it could have been worse, and he replies by moving to combat and sending Kefnet at Aron. Aron takes 4, and at Trevor's end step, he casts a Mystical Tutor, searching for a Cultivate, and putting it on top of his library. And here we'll pause for a moment, giving the store's Ramp Lord his due.
If this is going on the internet, I want one thing to be known, is that blue f***ing Mystical Tutor for Cultivate.
On Braden's turn, he untaps and draws, finding another 3-drop, which is not a land, and passes turn to Matthew. Matthew untaps and draws for turn, playing a Cinder Glade, which enters the battlefield tapped. He then taps the Zerta Druid, dealing 1 damage to each of his opponents, and taps 3 additional to cast a Skyshroud Claim. He searches for a Stomping Ground, which he shocks, and a Forest. At Matthew's end step, Aron cycles a Barrier Breach, and Braden responds by tapping his battlefield Forge to filter the mana into the Rugged Prairie, and casts an Unexpectedly Absent, targeting the Seedborn Muse. The Seedborn Muse is placed below the top 0 cards of Aron's library, and he draws it from the Barrier Breach. We then move to Aron's turn, and he draws his Cultivate, and pays 3 mana to cast it. He searches his library for a Forest, which he puts onto the battlefield tapped, and an Island to hand, which he places his land for turn, before passing to Trevor. Trevor untaps, and draws for turn, choosing not to reveal the card to Kefnet's ability, and proceeds to cast a Nettle Cyst. When it enters the battlefield, it creates a germ and attaches to it, and Trevor passes turn. Braden untaps, and draws for turn, and proceeds to
slaying this mountain down
before passing the turn to Matthew. Matthew untaps and draws for turn, and proceeds to tap the Zerta Druid, dealing 1 damage to each of his opponents, and 6 additional to cast Klauth Unrivaled Ancient from the command zone.
Klauth, Magic Dragon?
And before attackers are declared, Aron casts a Resculpt, targeting Klauth. Klauth goes to the command zone, and Matthew makes a 4/4 elemental. Attackers are then declared, and Matthew sends the Druid of Purification at Aron. Aron untaps and draws, paying
Wooburg for a 5/5 blocker.
and passes turn to Trevor. Trevor untaps and draws for turn, choosing again not to reveal the card to Kefnet's ability, and plays a Darksteel Citadel as his land for turn. He then casts a Wandering Archaic and moves to his end step. Before the end of Trevor's turn, Braden taps the battlefield Forge, losing 1 life, and casts a Path to Exile targeting his Legion Loyalist. He chooses not to pay the 2 to the Wandering Archaic's ability, and Trevor puts a copy of Path to Exile onto the stack. He keeps the ramp train rolling, and uses his copy of the Path to Exile to target his Germ token. The Germ token is exiled, and Trevor puts a mountain onto the battlefield, as well as the Legion Loyalist, getting Braden a Plains. Braden draws for turn, and plays a mountain, and he proceeds to cast a Geist-Honored Monk. When it enters the battlefield, he creates 2 1/1 spirits, and passes the turn to Matthew. Matthew untaps and draws for turn, playing a mountain, tapping the Zertha Druid, dealing 1 damage to each of his opponents, and 4 additional to cast a Soul's Majesty. He targets his 4/4 Elemental, and the Wandering Archaic trigger goes onto the stack. Aron and Braden point out that it would probably be a bad idea to give Trevor 4 additional cards, and Matthew decides not to pay the 2 in retaliation for having his commander destroyed. Trevor gets a copy of the Soul's Majesty and targets his Kefnet with it, drawing 4 cards. Matthew's spell then resolves, and he draws 4 as well, following it up with a Blasphemous Act. Braden responds by tapping his Cliffside Rescuer, targeting the Geist-Honored Monk, and giving it protection from his opponents until the end of turn. All of the creatures then get destroyed, and Trevor opts to put the Kefnet in his library 3rd from the top, and Galazeth and Garth go to the command zone. Matthew then taps the Boseiju and 2 additional, paying 2 life, to cast a Jeska's Will, targeting Trevor. Trevor has 8 cards in hand, so Matthew adds 8 red to his mana pool, and taps an additional green to cast Klauth from the command zone. He then moves to combat and sends Klauth at Trevor. Trevor takes 4, and Matthew adds 4 Gruul to his mana pool, and uses 3 of it to cast a Commander's Sphere, and passes turn to Aron. Aron draws for turn, and casts a Noble Hierarch. He follows it up by casting Garth from the command zone, and passes to Trevor. Trevor untaps, and draws for turn, and recasts Galazeth from the command zone, which creates a treasure token as he enters, and he follows it up with a Goblin Electromancer before passing turn to Braden. Braden untaps and draws, paying 4 for a Fireflux Squad and moving directly to combat. He attacks Matthew with the Fireflux Squad and the Geist-Honored Monk, which triggers the Fireflux Squad's ability, exiling the Geist-Honored Monk, and flipping over a Pia Nalar from the top of his library. Pia makes a Thopter as she enters, and Matt takes the 6. Braden passes turn to Matthew, who untaps and draws, playing an Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, before paying 7 to cast an Old Gnawbone.
Nah, boy.
Nah, fam. I'm not about it.
He then moves to combat and swings Klauth at Aron, who takes the 4 damage, and Matthew gains 4 Gruul mana from the attack, and 4 treasures from the Old Gnawbone, and passes turn. Aron draws and casts a Smothering Tithe, and follows it up with the Seedborn Muse. He then taps Garth to create a Black Lotus token, and passes turn to Trevor. On our untap, Aron also untaps, and Trevor draws a card, opting not to pay the 2, and Aron creates a treasure token. Trevor plays a mountain as his land for turn, and follows it up with a Prophetic Prism. He draws a card as it enters, and he and Aron both miss the Smothering Tithe trigger. He then casts a Shrewd Negotiation, targeting his treasure token and the Seedborn Muse. He holds priority, and casts an Increasing Vengeance, creating a copy of the Shrewd Negotiation, and having that copy target his Prophetic Prism and Old Gnawbone. Aron passes priority, allowing the first exchange to resolve, and when that's done, he responds to the original spell by overloading a Cyclonic Rift. Trevor responds to the Cyclonic Rift by casting Prismari command, choosing to create a treasure token, and drawing 2, then discarding 2. He pitches Metallurgic Summonings and Mizium Skin, and the Cyclonic Rift resolves. Trevor moves to discard, pitching the Goblin Electromancer, and on his end step, Aron responds by tapping Garth One Eye to cast a Regrowth, returning Cyclonic Rift to his hand. Aron and Braden untap, and Braden draws, opting not to pay the 2 for the Smothering Tithe, and Aron creates a treasure token. Braden then pays 2, taking 1 from the Battlefield Forge, and casting a Grand Abolisher. In response, Aron taps Garth to cast a Brain Geyser, spending 11 on the X. Aron draws 11 cards, and Braden casts a Brutal Cathar. When it enters the battlefield, it exiles Garth One Eye, and the turn is passed to Matthew. Matthew and Aron untap, and Matthew draws a card, opting not to pay for the Smothering Tithe trigger, and Aron creates a treasure token. Matthew plays a forest as his land for turn, and proceeds to tap his Boseiju, paying 2 life, to make some fancy mana, and casts a Decimate. He targets Aron's Seedborn Muse, his Smothering Tithe, his treasure token, and his island. Aron responds by sacrificing his treasure token and tapping 6 additional lands to overload the Cyclonic Rift again. Garth re-enters the battlefield. Matthew then recasts his old Gnawbone and passes turn. Aron untaps and draws and casts an Emergent Ultimatum. He finds an Expropriate, a Time Warp, and a Seagate Restoration, and the Expropriate is shuffled back into his library. He then casts the Seagate Restoration, drawing 13 cards, and follows it up with the Time Warp. He plays a World Tree as his land for turn, and taps Garth to create a Black Lotus token, and passes turn to himself. Aron untaps, and draws, and casts a Teleportation Circle. He follows it up by casting Urabrask the Hidden, and moving to end step, where he gets a Teleportation Circle trigger, targeting Garth. Trevor draws, and plays an island as his land for turn, and casts Galazeth from the command zone, which makes a treasure token as it enters. He then replays the Prophetic Prism, which draws him a card, and he passes turn. Braden untaps, and draws, and recasts the Brutal Cathar, targeting Urabrask the Hidden. He then pays 2, taking 1 damage from the Battlefield Forge, recasting the Grand Abolisher, and passes turn. On Matt's turn, he draws, and recasts Klauth, and Aron responds by sacrificing his Lotus and targeting it with a delay. Trevor responds by casting Reverberate, targeting the delay, having his copy target the original. The delay gets delayed, and Aron plays an additional response in the form of a Pongify, targeting the old Gnawbone.
Gnawbones!
Matthew gets an Ape and moves to combat, swinging Klauth at Aron and making 4 Gruul mana. He spends the 4 and an additional 2 to cast a Lurking Predators and passes turn. On Aron's turn, he taps Garth One Eye to create a copy of Regrowth, returning Time Warp to his hand, which triggers the Lurking Predators, and Matthew flips a Hydra Broodmother. He then casts the Time Warp, which triggers the Lurking Predators, finding an Arcane Signet, which goes to the bottom of the library. Aron follows it up with a Feybarrow Elder, which triggers the Lurking Predators again, finding Scourge of Valkis, who deals 3 damage when he enters the battlefield, and Matthew chooses to target Aron directly. On his end step, Aron targets Garth with the Teleportation Circle trigger, and passes turn to himself. On Aron's upkeep, the Dragon Broodmother creates a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, the Scourge of Valkis triggers, and Matthew chooses again to deal the 4 damage directly to Aron. Aron draws, and plays a Verdant Catacombs as his land for turn. He then casts a Blasphemous Act, triggering the Lurking Predators again, which finds a command tower, which Matthew puts on the bottom of his library, and in response, Aron taps Garth One Eye, making a Black Lotus token. On cast of the Black Lotus, the Lurking Predators triggers again, and Matthew finds a Finned Horn Elves, which he puts onto the battlefield. All of the creatures are destroyed, including the Brutal Cathar, which returns Urabrask to the battlefield. Aron recasts Garth, which triggers the Lurking Predators, finding a Terramorphic Expanse, which goes to the bottom, and then he taps Garth, casting a copy of Disenchant, targeting the Lurking Predators, which triggers, finding a Chain Reaction, which goes to the bottom of Matthew's library. Aron cracks his Black Lotus and pays 2 additional to cast a Conjurer's Closet and moves to his end step. Aron has the Conjurer's Closet blink Garth and taps it for a Black Lotus in response to the Teleportation trigger, which blinks Garth yet again, and he passes turn. Trevor untaps and draws, and recasts Galazeth from the command zone, which gives him a treasure token as it enters, and he passes turn to Braden. Braden untaps and draws, tapping his Battlefield Forge and taking 1 damage, casting Fateful Absence, targeting Urabrask. Aron responds, tapping Garth to cast a Regrowth, returning Pongify from his graveyard to his hand. Urabrask is then destroyed, and Aron gets a Clue token. Braden proceeds to cast a Cursed Mirror, which enters as a copy of Garth One Eye, and he moves to combat, swinging his copy of Garth at Aron, and passing turn to Matthew. Matthew draws, and casts a Seething Song, and follows it up by tapping his Boseiju, and putting 3 into the X cost of a Crackle with Power. He gets to deal 15 damage to 3 targets, and chooses each of his opponents. In response, Aron cracks a Clue token, and is taken out of the game. Trevor and Braden also take the 15, and Matthew passes turn. On Trevor's turn, he moves directly to combat and swings Galazeth at Matthew for 3. He then casts his own Crackle with power where X equals 3, taking out Braden and setting Matthew to 3 life. He casts a Curse of Opulence targeting Matthew and passes turn. On Matthew's turn, he casts a Thunderbreak Regent and follows it up with a Beast Within targeting Galazeth. Galazeth goes to the command zone, and Trevor gets a 3/3 Beast, and Matthew passes turn. On Trevor's turn, he recasts God Eternal Kefnet, and follows it up with a Nettle Cyst, which enters attached to a Germ token. He then sacrifices a treasure token to cast Secrets of the Golden City, drawing 3 cards, and passing turn. On Matthew's turn, he floats a red with his Commander Sphere and sacrifices it to draw a card, and Trevor remembers to represent his Beast token. Matthew then floats an additional 6 and casts a Tarka World Render before passing turn. Trevor untaps, and draws, and casts a Goldspan Dragon. He moves to combat and attacks Matthew with the Goldspan, the Nettle Cyst, and the 3/3 Ape, and Matthew declares no blockers. Matthew's taken out of the game, and Trevor wins. Thank you very much for watching. If you've made it this far, I'd like to say a few things about this project. It's been a long-time ambition of mine to create some Commander content of my own, and I'm very lucky to have this store and the community here to help facilitate that process. As the sole producer of this video, I'm happy to have been able to make the time to complete this project. That being said, this video took over 30 hours to edit and complete. If you would like to help me create more content like this, or if you would like to help me support my LGS, please check out the links in the description below. We're hoping to produce more soon. Thank you.